As Destiny's build crafting continues to evolve, there are more build options than ever before. However, with new builds being discovered and being labeled the best, it can be hard to truly pick the best build. Today I wanted to showcase what I believe to be the best builds for each subclass on the Hunters. I'll go over the subclass layout, preferred exotic gear, and mods so that you know what to run for each subclass. I'll also be covering the other two classes in this series, so be sure to comment which class you want to see next. If you'd like to skip to a certain subclass, all timestamps can be found in the description below. With that being said, I'm SniperKH, and let's dive in. We'll start with the Solar subclass. For the Solar subclass on Hunters, I found that the Young Ahumkara Spine build proves to be the best. This might seem odd considering that there are some other solid builds for this subclass, but I find this to be the most consistent for ad clear while also having some boss damaging capabilities. The subclass layout for this build can be found on screen, but I wanted to do a deeper dive into the layout to point out the importance of certain parts of this build. The important abilities for this subclass are our dodge, throwing knife, and trip mines, as we'll be using these three to have a consistent source of ability damage. For aspects, I feel Gunpowder Gamble and Knock 'em Down prove to be the best aspects you can run for this build, as Gunpowder Gamble acts as a pocket nuke you'll have constant access to that will also grant you grenade energy when dealing damage, while Knock 'em Down buffs your super and allows for you to refresh your throwing knife cooldown when getting defeats with it while radiant, giving you a constant source of ability damage. You might consider running On Your Mark following its recent buffs, and while it is definitely tempting since it would boost the survivability of this build, I feel that it takes away too much for what it provides in return, making it not worth it in my opinion. With this build, the two most important aspects you want to focus on are survivability and ability regeneration, so to help with those two, I've picked fragments that will help out with that. For the survivability side, Embers of Mercy and Empyrean will grant us easy access to our restoration buff and will allow us to easily maintain restoration in Radiant, allowing for us to be stronger. We'll also be using Embers of Torches and Blistering to boost ability regeneration. For the exotic gear, it's required that you use Young Ahumkara Spine, as this is what will allow for us to be able to throw trip mines consistently. For weapons, any solar weapon will be just fine, so pick your favorite one and go for it. For the stats you'll want to focus on, the main stats to focus are Grenade and Class, as we'll be using these two stats to generate our abilities back faster. If you have some leftover points for stats, then use them on the melee stats to increase ability regeneration for our melee ability. For the mods, I picked mods that focuses on boosting our grenades or enhancing the benefits we receive from using our grenades. Because of that, you'll see an importance in mods like Ashes to Assets, Firepower, and Grenade Fawn. Additionally, I used mods like Solar Weapon Surge to boost solar weapon damage, and Time Dilation to increase the time we have both Grenade Fawn and Solar Weapon Surge active. If you follow this layout as listed, you'll have a pretty great solar build to use in most areas of the game. That now brings us to the Void subclass, which definitely seemed to be the weakest Hunter subclass. That being said, I went with the build that might provide the most use in in-game content, being the Omnioculus build. Now truth be told, I heavily considered using the Orpheus Rig build, but since you'll have enough time to farm your super back in between damage phases and in-game activities, having a build solely focused around that is unnecessary. For this build, you'll want to copy the loadout you see on screen. When diving deeper into the selections, I opted to use Deadfall Tether as it's the best tether option to use for in-game content. For my aspects, I chose to run Trapper's Ambush and Vanishing Step. Trapper's Ambush will allow you to have the ability to do a diving motion to turn you and your teammates invisible for a short period of time. Vanishing Step will also grant you an easy way of invisibility through using your class ability, making getting out of sticky situations much easier. For the fragments, we want to focus on having fast regeneration on our melee attacks while also increasing the potency of invisibility and buffing our weapons and grenades. Due to that, I chose Echo of Provision, Echo of Undermining, Echo of Persistence, and Echo of Instability. For our choice of gear, Omnioculus is required for this build as it'll grant us an extra charge of smoke bombs, while also providing bonus damage resistance to ourselves and anyone else who we make invisible. For weapons of choice, I'd recommend running any Void weapon, since Echo of Instability will buff them. For stats you'll want to focus, I'd recommend Melee and Class again, as Melee will boost our melee regeneration, while Class will increase our class ability regeneration and grant us an overshield when we use it. For stats, since we'll be getting our melees back often, I mostly ran mods that were beneficial for the weapons I was using, so Harmonic Siphon and Void Weapon Loader and Surges will be useful. Additionally, you could opt to run a grenade focused mods like Ashes to Assets and Firepower, since our grenade will be the ability we use to get bonus melee energy if we happen to need more. While the Omni Oculus build isn't flashy in any manner, it's still a solid build in in-game content if you need to get out of a pinch or need to bail a teammate out of a sticky situation. Next, I wanted to cover Arc, as I find this subclass to have one of the best builds for hunters. You can find this subclass layout on screen, and thankfully this layout is pretty straightforward. Combination Blow will be the most important part of this build, as this ability will carry the damage aspect of this build while also serving the ability that will generate our super fast. The aspects of this build, you'll find the most use in Flow State and Lethal Current. Flow State will be useful as it'll grant you an easy source of Amplified, which will increase your class ability regeneration, while Lethal Current will allow your melee to be stronger by increasing the lunge range, granting jolting access, and allowing you to have solid ad clear capabilities. For the fragments chosen, we want fragments that will boost survivability and our ability's effectiveness, which is why Spark of Resistance, Spark of Shock, Spark of Feedback, and Spark of Ions are the best options for this build. For Spark of Resistance, this will increase our damage resistance while surrounded, which is very helpful for a melee focused build. For Spark of Shock, Feedback, and Ions, we'll be boosting our ability's effectiveness, whether it be granting jolting capabilities to other abilities, increasing melee damage, or granting another way of generating Bolt Charge. For the gear to use, Liar's Handshake will be required, as it'll boost your melee damage dramatically, allowing for this build to be so dominant. Outside of that, a 1-2 punch shotgun is really the only other piece of gear that would dramatically boost this build's productivity. For stats to focus, melee and class are the two most important, with melee boosting your melee gains and damage, and class boosting your class ability regeneration and giving you an overshield when using this ability. When it comes down to the mods, we're going to focus on melee-centric mods since this build is centered around Combination Blow, so mods like Hands-On, Heavy-Handed, and Melee Fawn are the go-tos. Other than that, using mods to upkeep our buffs for longer will be crucial as well, so be sure to include those. Arc Hunter has been one of the better subclasses for hunters to use, and with this build being the frontrunner, it's understandable as to how. Now that the light subclasses have been covered, let's now discuss the dark subclasses, starting with the Stasis subclass. Stasis did get a pretty rough nerf this expansion, being that it no longer stuns unstoppable champs when you freeze them, so the stocks for the subclass has dropped a little bit. That said, this build will still prove to be strong despite the nerfs. For the build, you'll want to copy the subclass layout you see on screen now. The important ability for this build will be Withering Blades, as we'll be explaining in just a moment. For the aspects, I'd recommend Grim Harvest and Winter Shroud. Grim Harvest will grant us the ability to spawn stasis shards when defeating frozen targets or shattering stasis crystal, with the shards granting us melee energy and stacks of frost armor. For Winter Shroud, this will allow for us to slow nearby enemies when dodging, which will work well for this build. That said, you could also replace Winter Shroud for Shatter Dive for an easy way to destroy stasis crystals if you'd prefer for that instead. For the fragments, I'd recommend Whisper of Rhyme, Whisper of Refraction, Whisper of Chains, Whisper of Hunger, and Whisper of Bonds. Whisper of Rhyme and Whisper of Chains will make our frost armor more useful and potent by increasing the max stack and duration, while also granting us a chance at getting stasis shards with frost armor active. For a Whisper of Refraction and Whisper of Hunger, they will boost our ability regeneration further, with Whisper of Refraction boosting our class ability regeneration when defeating slowed or frozen targets, and for picking up stasis shards respectively. For Whisper of Bonds, this will grant us an extra way of getting our armor buffs, which will prove to be useful. For the exotic gear to use, the only required gear for this build would be Mask of Fealty, as this will massively buff this build. Mask of Fealty allows for our Withering Blades to spawn stasis crystals when bouncing off a surface or hitting a target. From there, if we destroy the crystal with a Withering Blade, it'll spawn a spread of Withering Blades, which will target enemies and grants us bonus melee energy. For the weapon, you could use whatever weapon you'd like, but I'd recommend using Wicked Implement, as it received a major buff with this expansion, making it really underrated, especially since it can create stasis crystals for more melee energy. For the stats, I'd recommend Melee and Class, as these two stats are going to be the most crucial for this build for faster ability regeneration and damage. For the mods I'd recommend using that focus on melee abilities like Hands-On, Heavy-Handed, Melee Fawn, and more. For other mods to take, I'd suggest using Harmonic Siphon, Stasis Weapon Surge, Powerful Attraction, and Time Dilation. This build proves to have high ability uptime and lots of fun despite the Stasis nerfs, which is why it lands here. Heading on over to Strand, Strand Hunters received a pretty interesting buff with Ensnaring Slam, allowing for it to grant you Woven Mail when suspending targets with this aspect, which does help with survivability in this subclass. For the rest of the build layout, you can find it on screen now. The other main part of this build I wanted to highlight is our other aspect choice being Whirling Maelstrom, which will create a Beyblade-like object from our Tangle with the Beyblade going around damaging targets, which will increase the ad clear of this build massively. For our fragments, I wanted to go with fragments that would synergize well with our melee and suspending capabilities, so because of that I chose Thread of Warding, Thread of Mind, Thread of Fury, and Thread of Wisdom. Thread of Warding will grant us Woven Mail when picking up an Orb of Power, which can be used to refresh our Woven Mail timer. For Thread of Mind and Thread of Wisdom, these two will synergize with our suspending capabilities, being we'll get more class ability energy and an Orb of Power from defeating suspended targets. So for Thread of Fury, we'll get melee energy from Tangle damage, which does work with Whirling Maelstrom. For our exotic gear, the only required exotic to use is Moirai, which will grant our Threaded Spike a bonus functionality by exploding Tangles for us, retrieving Tangles for us, and granting bonus melee energy when not picking up a Tangle, allowing for us to have high melee uptime. For the exotic weapon side, there's not much I can recommend. New Malpais is a solid pick if you do want to run an exotic with this build, since it does have some suspending capabilities to it, but I just like Mint Retrograde more. For gear, you'll want to focus on the go-to stats for hunters, being melee and class, since those two stats will affect this build the most. For mods, you'll want to focus on the melee-centric mods, so I'd recommend Hands-On, Harmonic Siphon, Heavy-Handed, Melee Font, Invigoration, Strand Weapon Surge, Powerful Attraction, and Time Dilation. Overall, this Strand build for hunters is a super fun build to use that will also provide a high survivability and great ad clear, making it the best Strand hunter build. For the final build to cover in today's video, we have Prismatic, which is by far the best subclass available for hunters. For this build, you'll want to copy the subclass layout on screen now. As you could probably guess based on our melee pick, this build will be centered around a combination blow and pairing it with grapple melee. For our aspects, we'll be using Ascension and Stylish Executioner to help with ad clear and melee damage respectively. For our fragments, we'll be choosing the ones that boost survivability while also granting us easy ability regeneration. For survivability fragments, Facet of Hope and Facet of Protection will boost our survivability. For regeneration fragments, we'll be using Facet of Balance and Facet of Sacrifice. For our exotic armor, we do have two exotics that are required for this build. For starters, you'll need the exotic class item on hunters with Spirit of Inmost Light and Spirit of Synthesebs, as these two perks will boost our ability damage. For the exotic, we'll be using the Navigator with its catalyst, as this will grant us the ability to have infinite grapple melees, which will boost this build's damage tenfold. For the stats, there's 3 stats that are important to focus, so let's explain them. For this build, you'll need points invested into melee, grenade, and class. The most important stat here is grenade, as grenade will boost our grapple melee damage. That said, we need melee and class to have at least 70 points into each to have the synergy between combination blow and gambler's dodge. For our armor mods, the mod options might be a little more confusing, but allow me to explain them for you. Despite this build being a melee-centric build, our mods will be grenade focused since grapple melees originate from the grenade ability. So because of that, use Ashes to Assets, Firepower, Grenade Font, and Time Dilation, and you'll be getting every last ounce of this build's power. Other than that, basic mods like Powerful Attraction will also prove to be useful for this build. Overall, this build has proven to be the best build for hunters, and I have no doubt that'll continue to be the case going forward. Well, that'll wrap up today's video. If you found this video helpful, then a like rating would be greatly appreciated, and consider subscribing to the channel for more Destiny 2 content dropping soon. If you felt I missed a build, then drop a comment and let me know. Otherwise, be sure to check out my other content over on my other social media platforms, including this video where I highlight the latest changes to Destiny 2 and discuss if they're good for the game. I'm SniperKH, and I'm out. Good luck with gaming.